Hi, welcome to today's Zoom meeting discussion of Pluto in the 10th house or Capricorn. My name is Deva Green and I'll facilitate a discussion about the archetype of Pluto, the 10th house, and Pluto in the 10th house or Capricorn from an evolutionary point of view. And of course, as questions come up, I'd like to keep everybody on the same page, so please ask any questions as you have them. Okay, so starting with the Pluto-Saturn interface, looking at Pluto and its correlation to the archetype of metamorphosis, penetration, getting to the depths, to the principle of evolution itself and to the soul, and looking at Saturn and its correlation to boundaries, systems, structures, the need to learn how the system operates in order to establish personal authority within any given society or culture. When we synthesize Pluto and Saturn together, Pluto and Capricorn or Pluto in the 10th house is going to symbolize that prior to the current life, the soul has had a deep penetration on learning the rules, learn the laws, learn the rules, how any given society is structured and operates in order to establish their own personal voice or their own personal role within society. So Pluto magnetizes or intensifies anything that it aspects. So looking at Pluto-Saturn, this has been an intensified evolutionary lesson prior to the current life. Know the rules. Looking at this in terms of why this is important to the Pluto 10th house Capricorn archetype when it's linked with Pluto, is that in order to establish a voice of personal authority, or in order to establish a social role, you have to deeply learn how that society is structured and operates. Of course, the laws or the rules will be different in any given culture, but let's say, for example, if a soul recognizes that they have an inherent capacity to be a teacher, to be a psychologist, whatever it may be, that soul is then going to have to learn the rules. What am I going to then have to do in order to integrate that capacity within society? Do I need to get a credential? Do I need to go to more schooling? Does that progress to 7 years of school and so on? And also, it's important that a society determines a group of rules or a group of laws or norms to set a consensus to keep harmony and for there to be an accepted upon standard of conduct. So these issues have been very important to Pluto and Capricorn and Pluto in the 10th house, again, in order for them to ultimately actualize a social role in the world.
Deva, does a consensus take place in all stages of evolution, like, the consensus rules?
Oh, that's a great question. From my understanding, there can be an agreed upon set of norms or a standard of conduct that is agreed upon by different groups, and that may be more linked to Aquarius. But finding a consensus or finding a commonly agreed upon standard of conduct, from my understanding, is important to all evolutionary stages and all subgroups. Of course, those agreements are going to be different relative to different subgroups and different stages of evolution. But the underlying dynamic of an agreed upon standard of conduct, from my understanding, is what's central to that.
Okay, thank you.
Social position and social purpose. Yes, those with Pluto in the 10th house or Capricorn have desired to establish a social position or a social position in the world in order to actualize their own individual authority. In some cases, these souls have either abused their social position, or they have not quite integrated the dynamics of self determination, of discipline, of doing what they must, so to speak, in a self disciplined way to actualize a social purpose of meaning. Sometimes it can be defeating or making rationales relative to the system at large for trying to realize their social purpose or to have their ambitions realized. The ends justifies the mean approach. So, actualizing a voice of authority again has been a central evolution, has been a central focus for these souls prior to the current life, and learning the boundaries, learning what's naturally right and wrong in terms of how, the boundaries of that social position, what you can and cannot do. And from my point of view, the lesson is that it's not that it's to operate, of course, inside the natural parameters of what any position authorizes you to do and not, and also to exercise a degree of uh, a social adherence that, for example, just because I'm in this position, it doesn't authorize me to do this or that. That authority really isn't linked to position, but rather what's inherently right or wrong, which we'll start to talk about as we progress into this Zoom meeting. But essentially, it's to align with what's naturally right and wrong, and to use the social position within those parameters, what's naturally acceptable and what's not. So many of these souls have come in with a desire to actualize their own personal voice of authority, and to actualize a social position, and to learn the proper limits, what's okay to do with that position and what's not. Family environments. And this is really important too, because Saturn 10th house archetype naturally correlates to what we imprint, to what we take in from external systems or structures. So, family environment can play a very deep role in how we structure ourselves, what's modeled to us as being appropriate and inappropriate. Let's say, for example, if I imprint in the family environment a father who's very much bound into traditional gender roles as to what's appropriate for a man to do and what's not appropriate for a man to do, that's being determined by society, or that's being determined by the mainstream at large. This will have an impact on how Pluto in the 10th house will determine what's right and wrong. This is what I have structured, or this is what has been imprinted in terms of what the system expects. That's the square to Libra. And the family environment can also play a pivotal role in the fourth house polarity point, and ultimately freeing up the soul from being overly identified with the social career, with the social position, a self image that doesn't have those trappings. And the family environment can evoke very deep emotional lessons for the Pluto in the 10th. It can promote a necessary reflection. Why am I structured this way? Why have I put together my external reality this way? So the family environment can play a key role in catalyzing those lessons. conformity and judgment. That yes, the 10th house, Capricorn, also with Pluto, that there can be coming in with experiences where there's an intense projection of authority relative to the expectation to conform. Very intense and rigid imposed standards of conduct can be created at times by the family environment. And if the soul doesn't conform to those, then they experience judgment and they can't internalize that. Many of these souls have come into life with an inherent sense of guilt that can't consciously be explained. And part of the 10th house will be reflecting upon, why do I feel this judgment? Is it something that is it something that's linked with the external, or is this something that's coming from me, or both? Um, and it's linked with societal rights and wrongs and the expectation to conform, and also what the soul can inherently feel is right and wrong, natural law versus man made law. And when any of us transgress natural law, we'll feel funny, we'll feel an inherent sense of guilt, and we might not necessarily know why. This is emphasized, or this experience comes out in an acute way with Pluto in the 10th, or Capricorn, to bore out the difference between learned judgment or learned guilt, and that's what's been acquired, or natural guilt. Natural guilt is linked with prior actions that violate natural laws, and guilt in that sense can be a natural teacher of not to repeat the mistakes of the past. But guilt that has been injected, or guilt that's been learned, is meant to be jettisoned from the soul. It doesn't serve any purpose except to help us, especially in the 10th house, generate an awareness around guilt that can be used for teaching purposes, or guilt that can teach us to not repeat the mistakes of the past, and guilt that's been taken in from a societal point of view, uh, from man-made laws, and can build inhibition, or can essentially create stagnation. So discernment, that's the trine to Virgo around guilt that's based upon actions of our own, and guilt that's based upon man-made law or man-made judgment, is an intensified experience with Pluto in the 10th. Man-made laws and natural laws, coming from the ninth house, where the soul has learned to align with its personal truth and philosophy and so on. This is where it's given a structure. This is where it's given an external form. How do I personally establish this in the social realm? And this can either be based upon man-made law, laws that are made or formed by society, cultures, and tribes, or it can be based upon natural law, what's naturally true, what's intrinsically right or wrong. Um, and again, that man-made law is created either by a system, by a tribe. It can be imposed by authorities within society, and natural laws are self-evident. They are self-explanatory, and create an external structure, or when it's expressed in society, create a system where a natural embodiment of authority can come about. Natural limits, the proper use of social authority, social power, and so on. So with Pluto in the 10th, structuring around, or progressively purging those places that have become conditioned by man-made law, and restructuring around natural law, around what's most authentic, around what's most natural for the soul, what are my natural talents? What are my natural capabilities? How do I feel? What would be a most natural role for me, independent from what society deems as right or wrong, and so on. Those can be indications of where the soul has either become conditioned or where the soul is in alignment with natural law. Personal, natural authority, that this comes from intrinsic capabilities that can then, again, through self determination, be expressed within society. That this there can be a natural embodiment of the soul's social work in the world. That the soul isn't dependent upon a career or a social function to express a voice of authority. Rather, it's a vehicle, or it becomes a prism or a medium for it. But the soul isn't overly identified in such a way that an abuse of personal authority or transgressions of the natural limits of personal authority is experienced. And let's say, for example, this can also be related to gender issues, seeing the 10th house, 4th house axis. Let's say, for example, a man is feeling that his most natural role in the world, or that a natural voice of authority within society, would be linked to more traditionally feminine, or what can be labeled as society as what's most acceptable for women. And a good example, who I thought of, John Lennon. He became a house husband. He departed from his career and decided that for his own purposes and for his own growth, and what felt most natural for him, would be taking a role of a caregiver, or centering more around the family, and releasing from any negative judgments that he himself might have held about that. Oh my gosh, walking away from this career, and so on. But that was a personal embodiment of his own authority, was to shift from an over identification with the 10th house, and balancing it out through the 4th house, through taking a role more as a caretaker, or I think the term was house husband. And from my point of view, that's a natural expression of Saturn, um, via self-determination, determining from within, what feels right and wrong, inherently, from within, rather than having that be something that's determined externally, either by society or by family or any other external factors.
Ava, what are the natural expressions of the anima and animus, or the feminine and masculine?
The natural expressions?
Yes.
Yeah, from my understanding, the ways that those can be expressed naturally are when you're in balance with both, or when you're able to express equally both the inner masculine and the inner feminine in the social roles that you do. So let's say, for example, let's, I'm thinking of Yogananda. And we'll talk, he's one of the example charts. And when you look at his picture, there's both a balance of masculine and feminine. You can't really tell which gender. And as a natural expression of that, he taught children in a school in India to help balance the academic focus, also with a way of life, or also teaching meditation, Kriya Yoga, I believe, incorporating the natural world. Um, so making it more holistic. He had the North Node in the 9th house, and Pluto in Capricorn, or 10th house, North Node, or Pluto's polarity point in the 4th. And he describes himself as a simultaneous mother father. to the children, both discipline, from my understanding that he was very strict when it came to self-discipline, but at the same time playing a nurturing role, playing the role of nurturer and a mother-father. So a balance, or from my understanding, when they're both working in harmony with each other and they're both able to be expressed equally, that can indicate a natural expression or an integration of the anima animus, not one overruling the other, but they're both in equally integrated and expressed.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Depression, and this is an important aspect of Pluto in the 10th house too, because so often the 10th house Saturn archetype, Capricorn archetype, can experience a type of futility, a very deep depression, and the essence of it is reflection upon what needs to change. When things become outdated, or when things become overly structured or crystallized, often depression can take hold, in order to facilitate a more positive reflection upon what needs to change. So depression is, from my understanding, linked with what's become too stagnated, what's become too crystallized relative to the Saturnian elements in life, whether it's, let's say, for example, giving the external voices of authority just too much power over our lives, whether it's a boss who's just being very demanding or is expecting things of us that we don't personally feel comfortable with, and we don't we go into depression because it just seems that so much of the outside has so much power, um, and we at times feel that we don't know how to handle that, and the depression can then lead to an awareness of, structurally, I can make this change, I can make that change, I can respond more in this way, and having gone through a nodal return, Capricorn Cancer, from these archetypes too, and having experienced a depression that would ultimately came out, or a positive side of that can be a deeper integration of the internal locus of control, that ultimately a control over how we respond to circumstances, that the only thing we can really control is ourselves and our responses to what's happening on the outside, to help ease the depression. It's that saying that God give me the wisdom to change the things that I can, and to know the difference between that which I cannot change. So looking at the depression, it's what inner changes do I need to make in order to improve the conditions in my external world, whatever those be, and inducing a deeper level of internal security, um, that I can respond to this in a different way, or I can respond to this in a way to where I feel in control because I'm in control in my responses. And that can help ease the depression. So oftentimes can manifest, and uh, again, positively experienced. It can be, or it can induce a deeper level of reflection upon how we're structured, how we've structured our lives, elements that have become conditioned and that we previously weren't aware of. So, as much as possible, approaching depression in a positive way, to change what needs to be changed.
Deva, I wonder whether depression can be a gateway to the polarity point, the fourth house, because the 10th house can be the suppression of emotion, whereas the fourth house is the entry into the emotional body. What do you think?
Absolutely. A gateway to the fourth house, it promotes an awareness of what's going on the inside, an awareness of our emotional structure from the 10th to the fourth. So rather than the suppression, it's the accessing of the emotion and the gateway into the fourth house.
Okay, thank you.
Discipline, responsibility. That's right. That's with Pluto in the 10th house or with Capricorn. Um, Again, the intention is to, through self determination and through self effort, through self discipline, to actualize a personal role of authority in the world. And this requires that the soul becomes self responsible, that they either self discipline through time regulation, whatever the issue may be, and that they take responsibility, or that we take our responsibility for our actions rather than resort to underhanded means to have our ambitions realized. Uh, um, but that we take the responsibility to mature and to do what we must in order to realize our ambitions in a positive way, and to not develop the motto of the ends justifies the means, but rather promote a responsibility for ethically holding any social position that we have. And in a positive expression, those with the 10th house can exhibit a deep dislike towards those who use underhanded or unethical means to realize their ambitions, or who hold social roles. And they can then expose or shine a light on how to use a social role in a very responsible and disciplined way. Pluto Saturn can become models or can embody how to overcome the odds, or how to, through one's own self motivation, and again through self discipline, to manifest what the soul knows it has a capacity to manifest. So you can see the two different spectrums, as with any Pluto sign, and that those can also have an intrinsic desire for responsibility, or will call out or feel a responsibility to shine a light on those who are not using the socially acceptable means in their social positions or in society.
Deva, what about our responsibility towards preserving the earth? Capricorn is an earth sign. Is there a connection?
Absolutely. Preserving our it's also a trine to Taurus, preserving the earth, or let's say, for example, restructuring, or uh, what that makes me think of what you shared, Linda, was showing this or demonstrating this responsibility through different ideas of how to restructure and preserve our planet, whether it's cities that are made from forests, or whether it's clean fuel, different ways to conserve nature. It's all a structure, creating a new structure so that that can be at the root of it, or the structure becomes a responsibility towards preserving our earth.
Beautiful, thank you.
Self-determination. Yeah. From my understanding, this can also correlate to, uh, um, let's say, for example, not falling into defeat when either negative judgment um, uh, can become a stumbling block or false judgment. It's knowing from within yourself what you're able to do. And no matter how many times you have to keep doing it, just keep making those efforts until what you want is finally realized. There's a square to Aries, but the self-determination is not really letting the external, and it's my point of view, but not really letting the external defeat you, or not using that as a justification to say, well, I'm sorry, but the system outside of me is just so large that I can't I can't do it. And through self determination, the Capricorn archetype goes, well, I think you can. And just keep trying, or just keep making those efforts to actualize or to manifest what the 10th house structurally feels is right. Um, and in that way, uh, um, not letting the external world become a means for pessimism or falling into negative characteristics, but rising to your best. Saturn can be a taskmaster, or Saturn can require a lot of inner discipline and self determination to bring the best out of you. And to accomplish our goals, or to achieve what we know we can, we have to have that inner spark, or we have to do that for ourselves, even if there's nobody on the outside. It's like being our own parent. Like, okay, there's nobody around me saying I must, but I do. I know that I have to, and I know that I got to push myself. And so that's what's going to happen. It's that 10th force. And then the best can ultimately be reached. That whatever our goals are, or whatever it is that we want to achieve, that can manifest in external reality. Maturity. Absolutely. It's all about growing up. It seems like no matter how old you are, that there's just always this process of maturity and growing up. so it seems so it seems that no matter how old we get, that we're always going through a process of maturity, or always going through a process of growing up. And that can be the beauty of the 10th house, is a natural maturity that comes from my understanding, accepting responsibility in what's ours in our own actions, and via the fourth house, reflection upon our internal dynamics. Why am I emotionally put together in the way that I am? What factors have molded or shaped my self image? Why are my emotional responses the way that they are? Leading to a natural growing up, or leading to a natural maturity. So that's a emphasized lesson of Saturn, 10th house Capricorn, and emphasized when Pluto's in the 10th house. Timeless standards of conduct. Absolutely. That these rights and wrongs, or these supposed to be's, what's normal, what's not normal, that from a timeless point of view, or that standards of conduct progressively get linked with the timeless, or the universal, via the linkage to Neptune, sextile to Neptune. It's dissolving those artificial standards of conduct, or those man-made or societal supposed to be's, or ought to be's, or here's what's normal. And
I have
the
a
time
question.
aligning more with what's timelessly right and wrong for all times, all cultures. It transcends the cultural barriers, and that comes from a disillusion of what's been societally prescribed, and progressively aligning with uh, the source, or with an eternal energy. Again, there's intrinsic rights and wrongs that are not prescribed by society. It's natural rights and wrongs. Um, and when we align with that, a core point within that is the nature of judgment. And the point is that judgment is intrinsic to consciousness. An artificial standard may say, oh, you should never judge, not under any circumstances. And judgment is quite natural to consciousness. The issue is, what's the content? What's underneath the judgment? How is the judgment being formed? And if judgment is based upon a societal or a man-made supposed to be, then those can be projected judgments, or those can be subjective judgments. Whereas judgments that are based upon natural laws or timeless, ultimately what's correct and incorrect and so on, that those can help any of us mature, solidify into our capacity. It's always good to be able to judge our own conduct in appropriate ways as to what's acceptable and what's not. And in that way, judgments can be formed more around natural law and what's intrinsically right and wrong. And again, can help us grow up and can help us mature by aligning with the timeless standards of conduct that are in alignment with natural law.
David, we have a question from the audience. Go ahead, Annie.
Right. This is Annie. So, Deva, the timeless standards sound more like they come from a higher evolutionary stage, as opposed to something that might be consensus oriented. And I wonder if that statement makes any sense to you, if you could comment on that. Timeless being
Oh,
more
I
aligned
see.
with natural versus man-made, or is it just, are you distinguishing the different evolutionary stages through either man-made or natural law?
That's a great question, and thank you so much for asking that. And let's say, for example, timeless standards of conduct will be true regardless of any society or passage of time or so on. That they, in a sense, transcend time and space. And any culture, thank you, it helps me form, or it helps me adjust the language I'm using, so I appreciate it. And from my understanding, that any tribe or any culture or society can reflect natural laws, or within it can reflect timeless standards. But it's not the culture that determines that. It's not that it's the culture, or that it's not that it's the society that determines what's right and wrong. That naturally speaking, that it's intrinsic to our consciousness. Timelessly speaking, that will be true no matter what society or culture or how much time has gone by. But again, I appreciate you asking that, because cultures can, of course, in any evolutionary state, reflect these timeless standards, or can reflect an alignment with natural laws and give it structure, give it form. But from my understanding, the point is that uh, it's not created or determined by society. Um, that society can reflect what's ultimately right and wrong, or naturally right and wrong.
I have a question
Okay.
too.
And thank you.
Um, David, do you do you think that we all have that ability within us to access these timeless standards of conduct, or is it, or
Yeah, from my understanding that, let's say, for example, in terms of timeless standards of conduct, whenever we do something that we feel funny about, it can come in ways that we might not fully be conscious of. But from my understanding and the way I've experienced it, which I think many can relate to, or at least from my point of view, it's that feeling of guilt, or or the feeling of having done something good that we either feel proud of, or that we acted to right a wrong, or course correction, or that we acted in a responsible way. We can feel good, or we can feel proud of ourselves, or that we did the right thing. So in these real simple ways, sometimes we again can feel funny without knowing why. And then a little bit later, after reflection, oh, I can see, now I'm understanding why I felt funny about that. So it can be in these real subtle ways that we can all tune into this, or that we can experience this natural, or that we can tune into natural laws, or what we feel is correct and not correct, in ways that again are determined from within. It's not determined by the external, but rather our internal responses.
Okay, thank you. So I guess my point, or where I was going with it, is that some people can ignore it. Then it all depends on whether you acknowledge it and explore it.
That's exactly right. And that the essence of that, in my view, is responsibility. It's just my perspective, but absolutely, some can choose to ignore it. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's our response to it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
Deva, I've got one more question on this one. I feel that we can tune into the flow of timeless conduct on an intuitive level and flow along with it. Would this be described by the Capricorn sextile Neptune?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be exactly via empathy. From my point of view, empathy is a Pisces Neptune 12th house, can tune us into that timeless right and wrong. Via the Neptune archetype, we can flow along, or we can create an alignment or an attunement with it.
So it's the standards of conduct are a natural state for everyone. It's a natural thing inherent in humans. Is it just something that we have to unlock or learn how to flow with? What do you think?
Yeah, it's like a restructuring, or let's say, for example, the 10th house, 12th house, dissolving the parts that would defend, or that would push against it, or that have become conditioned, and restructuring or trusting our more authentic responses, like re-engaging, or reacquainting with it. And from my point of view, looking also at the fourth house polarity point, it's an internal dive. It really pushes us into our emotional bodies. Let's say, for example, this might be a simplistic explanation, or just an example that I could help with looking at the archetypes. It could be, for example, somebody who's had a lot of uh, authority exhibited on them, or a lot of pressure. everybody else around them saying, this is what's right, this is what's right, do this, and if you don't do this, then that means this or that. But the person is trusting their own inner judgment. I wouldn't feel right about doing this. So it might not be that it's consciously linked with, oh, this is a timeless standard, but it's getting back into the flow, where it's through being really pushed into one's internal waters, one's emotional body, and how they'd be feeling if they did that, or how they were feeling about that, that they can come back into tune with what would be universal, or what would be timelessly or naturally right or wrong, or so on. And I know that many of us have experienced that, especially through these long Pluto transits, having to trust our internal responses, and resisting external pressures to act this way or that way. Because at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable with yourself, and you have to feel right about the choices that you made. And from my understanding, this is all reacquainting us um, with what's naturally speaking right and wrong. So it's in those kind of ways that we come back into alignment with it. um,
Perhaps it's like any other sextile that you have to do something to activate it. It doesn't just happen.
right. You often it can be integrated, but absolutely that it comes through self effort, or it comes through action. Yeah.
Great.
So looking at these evolutionary stages, and how the 10th house in Pluto, or Pluto in Capricorn, can be expressed. In the consensus, it's very much learning how the consensus or mainstream society works in order to get up the social ladder. So this is what this culture is expecting. This is how this system works. Here's how I can get to the top. Here's how I can realize my goals from a mainstream point of view. What do I need to do to realize that? And in the individuated state, it will authority, or establishing a personal voice of authority, will come through a more alternative, or will come through a breaking out of the more conventional or more mainstream expressions of authority, and will be more in alignment with that soul's individuality. Let's say, for example, the soul has a natural capacity, or a natural ability to work more in the realms of alternative therapy, deep memory processing, things that really go outside the norm, alternative education, whatever it may be, that in this stage, the determination and the focus will be upon establishing a role in the more alternative realms. What's going to help me break out of this more mainstream, or this more 10th house approach? And the soul will be deeply questioning in this stage those who are in authority. And from my understanding, these can be those who can also deeply question. Let's say somebody has a certificate. Where does this authority come from? It can be the beginning in that stages, and who determines capacity, or what demonstrates that. Just getting a certificate? Is there more to that? So it's kind of breaking out. That's not to say that, if you need to do it, of course, but it's like the active questioning of the norms, and establishing a role in the more individuated context, and looking at spiritual stage, that these can be those that are structuring around more the timeless, or more the more natural laws, can be the structure or the system that they integrate into. going back into the individuated state for a moment, that these can be those that are really determining from within themselves what's right and wrong, to trust their own judgments or to trust what's right and wrong for them individually, in comparison to social norms. And in the spiritual state, it's establishing a role that reflects universal, timeless laws, that's structuring around a higher authority. Let's say, for example, in the spiritual state, these can be those who are seeking a type of spiritual authority, to help structure or to help guide forming along these lines. It can be those who also assume a role for those who are looking to align with natural laws, and vice versa. Uh, can see the capacity in others who are structuring around this as well. So the core of it is a role in the world that reflects an alignment with these universal or natural laws, and many will be perceived as embodying a voice of authority, or that are role models for this, who have structured around it, um, and to where the guideline becomes connection to source, or forming around a structure that is defined by that relationship. Um, Ultimately, via that Neptune Saturn reference, the sextile, connecting into what's infinite, or connecting into what's timelessly true, and dissolving the more cultural, or dissolving the conditioned parts. That can be the primary focus of Pluto in the 10th. Natural, structuring around natural ways to spiritualize versus man made. What's my most natural way to do this? And so on. And one of our examples, from my point of view, really reflects an embodiment of a natural role of authority. He was, in a spiritual sense, he was accepted as a voice of spiritual authority here in the West, even though he came from the East, which within itself is a feat. Not many would listen to a strange sadhu. But he had his certificate from a university, which even made him laugh. He said, this was bestowed upon me at the time for reasons I didn't know, but when I went to the West, I found that I was more easily accepted having this credential. Very, very 10th house, right? But looking at Yogananda's chart, he has Pluto in Gemini in the 10th house, conjunct Neptune, and in this context, accepted as a voice of spiritual authority, or accepted as a voice of possessing knowledge of timeless universal laws. And what he always wrote, or what he emphasized, was, don't take this just on faith, or don't take this just because I'm saying so. This is really the beauty of the 10th house. But take this from your own perspective, from your own experience, or from your own direct perception. It's that South Node in Scorpio in the third, conjunct Uranus there too. Very, very deep and powerful speaker. In my view, a very powerful writer, because it came from encouraging that others cultivate this relationship from within themselves, and that it didn't really require a second or a third person to do that. He also spoke of his own experience with his guru Yukteswar, and 10th house having to, of course, cooperate with wishes that were not in compliance with his own wishes. He did not want to reattend school, or and so on. But the 10th house understood that ultimately it was for a higher purpose, if not seen then. And the 10th house, the issue of adhering to a higher voice of authority, which of course he did. Um, and looking at Taurus in the ninth house, how he was able to encapsulate, or from my point of view, write about what was being passed down from his own guru, timeless messages from the East, and really encapsulate them in practical, everyday, here's how you can do it on your own, North Node and Taurus. He was able to communicate these real profound teachings, but in a real simplified way. And looking at the third, ninth axis, nodal axis, and Pluto's polarity point in the fourth, he was able to convey east meets west. He was able to, in a very simplified manner, convey these natural laws that are the essence or the foundation of the East. What he learned in India, what had been passed down to him, and so on. Also teaching the younger children, teaching them more holistically, or including meditation, connection to nature, being more holistic, seeing the ninth house, North Node, and also seeing the Venus and Sagittarius in the fourth. And what he shares so beautifully, in my view, too, looking at the South Node and Uranus and Scorpio in the third, and the Pluto opposing Venus, with Neptune and also Venus being in the fourth, sudden and traumatic loss. He lost his mother at a very early age, but what he writes about is through that experience, it helped him uh, um, integrate more around the Divine Mother, the Universal Mother. And one of the most beautiful experiences he writes about is, of course, emotionally speaking, having to process his grief. And a vision came and uh, said to him in the Divine Mother that, don't you see that it was me looking after you the whole time, in this mother or in that mother or in this form or that, trying to help him so relieve your grief, or try to find as much solace in that. Him sharing that through his writings, or these natural principles, experiencing traumatic loss and growing, or the natural causes, what it was meant to help him do in the end over time. So he's really deep, again, becoming accepted as a spiritual authority, simultaneously mother, father, international, East meets West, really simplified or condensed version of uh, these really universal truths that were conveyed. Again, I think it started in the East, or very connected to India, but asked to share these in the West for his own purposes, for his own evolution, and being accepted as being able to transmit this type of knowledge or wisdom to others. Um, and advocating resources of how you can do this for yourself, or how you can tune into, or how you can cultivate a relationship with Source all on your own, um, uh, and so on. So, looking at this Pluto in the 10th house, how he structured himself, going to the West, having to learn English, having to readjust, or having to take what he learned in the East, and fourth house, internal security, carry his inner home with him. Even though public speaking and going into a very different environment, preserving or holding on to what he'd learned there. So very dynamic chart, in my view, an example of a 10th house Pluto who established a role in the world that reflected his natural capacities and abilities, and can be passed down to others as well. Leonard Cohen, and he's a great example too of a 10th house Pluto who embodied, from my vantage point, a natural voice of authority, in that looking at South Node in Leo in the 11th and Mars there, a very different approach to his creativity, that his songs and his music are very deep. One of his songs that many people enjoyed was The Future. South Pluto in the 10th, South Node in the 11th, and talking about the liberation from judgment, or if we didn't change how we're structured, you won't like the future. So 10th house is getting to the deeper issue, or getting to the system or the structure. The 11th house is promoting a change. How can we realign with more of a natural structure, a natural paradigm? Um, and looking at the Venus, Sun, and Virgo on the 12th, and Neptune, the downtrodden, were reaching out to those who were the underdogs. He did have an issue where he was his resources were uh, pretty much ripped off by the music company, and also somebody that he trusted. So looking at this Virgo on the 12th, seeing people clearly, uh, looking at the Uranus in the 8th house, ruler of the North Node, whom to trust, whom to not, specifically with resources. A naivety there. So a growing up perhaps occurred through his musical career, and a discretion or a discernment about who could be trusted and whom not. And somebody who worked with him very closely, Bono from U2, uh, gave such a beautiful description of him, where said that he is the type that he will throw away masterpieces, what other people would consider masterpieces. He'll just, for them, they're not quite good enough. They don't meet his standards. Pluto in the 10th, and looking at this Venus, Neptune, and Virgo in the 12th, a critic of his own work for sure. And it makes me think of his lyrics that there's a crack in everything. That's how you let the light get, that's how the light gets in. So forget your perfect offering, because there's a crack in everything. Definitely an individuated soul for sure. Um, and that the way that they established themselves in the world really reflected these more timeless, or these more universal truths. Um, uh, Liberation or individuation occurring through uh, a career that accessed the emotions via the 4th house. Um, uh, Taking what's on the outside, or being able to manifest the emotional body, or the emotional dynamics through his career. Looking at the moon in Pisces too, seeing that it's in the 6th house. Another beautiful quote by him is, "Love is the only engine of survival." Moon in Pisces, all this 12th house. So his emotional body, or emotional lessons, also being accessed through the external career in ways that liberation or deconditioning from what had been outdated or outstructured could take place. In my point of view, a unique artist for sure. Um, uh, Somebody who has had very high standards of his own work, um, and was a perfectionist in that way. You can see that again in the 10th house, the Virgo in the 12th, um, and gave us a very different view, or gave us music that was very timeless, in the sense of, with the moon in Pisces, things that we all universally experience, um, and was a means for him to individuate, or was a means for him to establish a role in the world that best reflected his individuality, seeing the 11th house, and to access his emotions as well. music becoming a vehicle for that. The 12th house, and also seeing the Jupiter, Mercury, and Libra. From my point of view, from what I understand, that can symbolize music. So that becoming a medium for this expression to come through and to embody a role in the world that felt most natural, that felt most authentic. All right, so wanted to thank everybody for joining today, and thank you for the questions and for the participation. I really appreciate it. Are there any Q&A or any follow-ups before we close?
I'm just very grateful for your perspective. It really always helps broaden mine, and love listening to you. So thanks so much.
Absolutely, I agree. Thank you, Deva.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for the support and for joining today. I really appreciate the time and the energy. So until next time, namaste.
Bye.